Hello and welcome back to the NFL DFS Slate Breakdown for Thursday Night Football. We got the Commanders and the Bears. It's going to be a fun one for DFS purposes, and when we have games like this, we are very thankful we have DFS to just keep us entertained a little bit more on, a less than terrific game we got slated today. But I think there are some interesting angles for DFS, and we will get into those now. Before we do, come join us at LineStar. It is only $39.99 per month. Gets you access to everything we do. All the props, all the DFS, all of our tools for every sport we cover. We have NHL starting in only a couple days, and then we have NBA right around the corner in a couple of weeks. This is the best time to get involved. We got playoff baseball, we got NFL going, all major sports are going to be going very soon. So let's go. Come join us. All right, now let's get into the slate a little bit here. So we do have a interesting one here with the Commanders and Bears. As always, we're going to go through some ownership. We're going to go through the matchups, and then maybe, some sleepers at the very end that we should consider. So let's start with going to ownership, and I will start on DraftKings with that once I can find the game. There we go. All right. No surprise, as every week, quarterbacks are the highest owned. Both these quarterbacks, actually, you can use in the captain spot today. Both of them have some rushing upside. As I've said over and over and over again, that's really the only time I like captain quarterbacks. Howell had, I think it was 40 yards last week. He can move. He could score a touchdown with his feet. And obviously, Justin Fields can. The one thing I will say with that is they haven't been letting Justin Fields use his legs, which is a big bummer because that is where his upside comes from. So hopefully soon they, realize they're being very limiting of Justin Fields in not letting him just play and run, scramble, get in the open field, make some people miss because he is electric when he's able to. When he's not, he's just a poor quarterback on a poor team. All right, ownership-wise, heavy lean to Washington on this side. They are 6-point favorites for good reason. This Bears team is terrible, but I don't think Washington is all that great either. I think it's a very, very realistic possibility that the Bears are in this game in the fourth quarter and have a chance to win. And if that is the case, all this ownership shouldn't be going to Washington over going to some of the Bears players. So I do think it is interesting to have some of these Bears guys on your team. Washington, they should win this game. They are heavy favorites, but, they're just not a great team as a whole. Ownership-wise, Curtis Samuel, Brian Robinson, and Jahan Dotson are getting all the ownership. Scary Terry is definitely the best wide receiver play in this game. It is interesting that all of those other guys are a little more higher owned than him. Brian Robinson's obviously in a great spot to rush, so I understand his ownership being high. Now we got DJ Moore, Khalil Herbert, Darnell Mooney, all coming next, all in that 20 to 30 range. I think these guys are interesting. There is some upside. If the Bears can keep this game close, Herbert's going to get a lot of work. And if that's the case, his price isn't too high, his ownership isn't too high, he does make an interesting option. Now we go to the guys that are lower owned, go sub 10% here. Equinemius St. Brown, I can't even talk right now. 10%, I don't really like it. I don't love the Bears passing game to begin with, let alone the, wide receiver 3. Now, he got one target last week, but that is the only target that he's had. Don't love paying his price there. Komet, I think, is absolutely in range here. 6,400, 8.4% owned. He is extremely interesting. We saw him get 2 touchdowns last week. We saw him with a couple big weeks last year. So the upside is there for him to be a DFS winning play. Interesting that nobody's going there. The tight end for the position for Washington is very interesting. They use the tight end a lot, and they use both guys. Logan Thomas had, 3 targets last week, which isn't much. I don't really mind going to, say, Bates here, who's been getting a couple targets every single week, much cheaper, and has no ownership here. I think it is an interesting play, hoping for a touchdown there. Byron Pringle, like St. Brown, I just don't love really going in the depths of that Chicago offense now, Washington offense for him. I think that with their tight ends and their 3 receivers, there's just not much more to go around in that Washington offense. Clay Turner was a thing when Thomas was out, but Thomas is back, so he has kind of gone into that no man's role there. Same with Travis Homer, no man's role. Now, Dyami Brown is someone we can be slightly interested in. He is too expensive here, but we have seen him be able to put it together. And he's got, 3 targets last week, 3 targets in week 2. He does have the ability to get a couple touchdowns or a couple touches, a couple targets. Now it's just, does he get a touchdown or not? And with nobody going there, he is slightly interesting, but there's a lot of places to go with that Washington ball. Don't know if they need to get him involved in this game, in which will be should be an easy matchup versus that defense. Kicker ownership. It looks like Santos is probably the sharper play just because of ownership-wise. Slay will be scoring, but 10% less on a kicker when, it's really a toss-up which one scores more is definitely interesting. And then defensive-wise, 11% owned for the Commanders, 1% for the Bears. I think both defenses are in play in this game. Both offenses are sloppy. Both offenses aren't that good. So while, the Bears defense is terrible, Sam Howell is still a young quarterback and can make some mistakes. So I think defenses are absolutely in play. Now, if we go over to FanDuel ownership here, it is quite a bit different. Herbert is high owned on FanDuel, 46% owned, but then we have the slew of Washington guys followed by the Chicago guys. One guy we didn't talk about on the DraftKings side was Roschon Johnson. He is going, unowned on DraftKings, 30% on FanDuel. Now, I think his ownership actually should be higher on DraftKings. The reason being, if he is an optimal play, it's because the Bears are down big and down quick. And his pass catching can then step in and he can create some and get some work in the passing game. That is his path to being an optimal lineup, is the Bears being down big. So if you're putting Johnson in lineups, understand that is the narrative that you should be driving, those lineups from, being the Commanders being up big time. That's when he's playing. When the Bears were playing Denver last week, they got up to a big lead, and because of that, Roschon barely saw the field, whereas Herbert was on the field a ton, and I think that's the situation where we're going to see more of a 50-50 split between those two backs is when the Bears are down. So, just a little tidbit there. 20% owned DJ Moore on FanDuel is interesting. as is Curtis Samuel. Curtis Samuel only 20% owned, and Darnell Mooney's low owned. Gibson, he's going to go very low owned today. The only way he ends up optimal in my eyes is a similar situation as to Roschon Johnson. It would be the Commanders being down big early. Now that is not as likely as Roschon Johnson, so his ownership is a little bit further down. But I think it is, interesting to talk about, because if we flip that game script, say we have Khalil Herbert, Bears are up, then Gibson makes a little more sense in the lineup. Kmet, once again, not really being owned. He has the upside that could be. I don't like Turner. Tanyan, got a couple targets last week, but outside of that, he hasn't really been used on FanDuel. We probably don't need to go there. I think Bates is interesting on FanDuel. He is cheap, and getting a couple targets, if he gets in the end zone, he will be one of the optimal guys, as well as Diami Brown. All right, now let's get into the matchups so we can talk a little bit more in depth. All right, so starting at quarterback, both matchups for the quarterbacks are very good. Both also can run, so I'm interested in both guys here. Now, the one thing I will say, Washington has faced a lot of very good quarterbacks. They have Josh Allen and Hurts they've gone against. Neither of those quarterbacks really lit it up. So this matchup might be a little tougher for Fields than it is for Howell. Meanwhile, Chicago, we just continually see them get lit up by quarterbacks, and the defense get lit up by teams. Love, Mayfield, Mahomes, Wilson have all done very well, and all been able to score or throw for passing touchdowns. So Howell is absolutely in play here. The running back spot, we've touched on it a little bit already, but it is very interesting. Brian Robinson does have the best matchup in this game. Not saying that Gibson is worse, because, Gibson is above Robinson on our matchup tool here, but the thing I have to say about that is that it is a 6-point favorite for the Commanders. So the likelihood of Gibson really being able to take care and, take advantage of this matchup is just less likely to happen. Khalil Herbert, the matchup isn't that bad. It doesn't look great, but if we look, Swift, 56 yards and a touchdown. Cook, 98 yards. He also did well through the air. Javonte Williams, only 44 yards, but he's splitting carries with P. Ryan, and then James Conner, 62 yards. So Herbert, as long as he's getting the carry, should have the yards there. Now it just comes down to, does he get in the end zone or not? He does have the second most red zone tries in this game. First is Brian Robinson. Second is Khalil Herbert. I think he had 4. Robinson has 8 over the last 2 weeks. So it is interesting to go with Herbert in this spot. Now, as we talked about earlier, just once again to touch on it, Roschon Johnson is an interesting play if the Commanders are able to get out to a lead quick. Going into the wide receiver spot, I really do like Curtis Samuel today. I think he may go a little high owned on DraftKings, but he is interesting on FanDuel for sure. DJ Moore is in a really good spot. A great matchup for him. Wide receivers have been able to do very good versus Washington. DJ Moore just isn't the wide receiver, or he doesn't have the quarterback, say, that A.J. Brown and Diggs got. So it's not quite as much of a home run play as those guys, but the upside is there, and you saw that upside last week when he went for 8 receptions, 131 and a touchdown. We know DJ Moore is the guy that can do that, and he has been fairly consistent so far this year with, 100 yards versus Tampa Bay, 41 and a touchdown versus KC, and now he's getting Washington. I think he is interesting and probably going a little lower owned than he should. Jahan Dotson, I don't love it. I do think that Curtis Samuel is a little more interesting, but, you can't deny that Dotson will have the opportunities. He had 9 targets last week, 4, 5, 7. So he's been targeted, consistently. The matchup is decent, and he could take advantage. We'll just skip over St. Brown. You guys know my thoughts. I don't love the spot for him. Could he get a couple? Yes. Darnell Mooney, I think, is interesting. The reason he's interesting is he is a speedster. He could get deep and make his night on one play. Probably a broken play, but he could make his night on one play. Scary Terry is definitely my favorite wide receiver play on the night. I think he just has the most paths to success. Mike Evans crushed him. Romeo Doubs crushed them. And then MVS isn't a true number one. Jerry Jeudy, isn't totally a true number one either. Also still working back from injury. His snaps aren't fully back yet. So I do, give them a little bit of a discount there. And I think McLaurin's in a really good spot to crush that Bears offense. Tight end wise, Logan Thomas does have a very good matchup. The one thing with that, I will say, is that all the tight ends have a very good matchup, and the Commanders have been using multiple tight ends. So while ownership is a little bit higher on Thomas, I think you could go to, say, Bates or even maybe Turner, but I just don't expect Turner to play very much, so I'm not very high on him. Whereas I think Bates will be on the field. He will be on the field for red zone situations, and that gives him a decent chance at getting into the end zone. Now, Logan Thomas is a guy that has been hurt a lot over the last couple of years, so maybe he gets hurt early and Turner's on the field a little bit more. But regardless, I think this Commanders tight end spot is one we need to look at. Cole Kmet obviously has huge upside, but this Washington team has locked down tight ends so far this year. Kmet is going super low owned, and he is heavily involved in the offense, so I do think he's interesting to still use. Just understand that they've been tough against tight ends so far. Could change tonight, but it hasn't so far. So, just to touch on things again quickly, some lower owned punt plays, if you will, that I like. Kmet, Bates, Roschon Johnson, I think are all very interesting. And then you can consider some defenses or kickers to get different, as well as Dyami Brown. I think those are the lower owned guys that are interesting. Pretty much all the higher owned guys do have a path to success, and that's really why they are higher owned. So don't fade a guy just because of ownership, but play pieces together as they should in a narrative that would fit. Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson in the same lineup, they have different paths to success, so it's probably not likely that you want to play those guys together, as well as Herbert and Roschon Johnson. Now, in a lineup where Roschon Johnson does really well, Commander offense pieces probably do really well as well. So just think of that when you're building. Think of the narrative and build around that game script that you think happens for every lineup. And it'll put you in a better position to potentially succeed tonight. Good night, everybody. Good luck. Let's win some money. I'll see you back tomorrow for that main Slate DFS show. Bye.